In the year 1078, a monk named Anselm of Canterbury astonished the world by arguing that if it is even possible that God exists, then it follows logically that God does exist.
Hi, it's me again, Babina. I've heard this argument before, but it still surprises me every time I hear it.
Anselm's argument came to be called the Onto-illogical Argument, and it has sharply divided philosophers ever since. The 19th century German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer called it a charming joke, but many prominent 20th century philosophers such as Charles Hartshorne, Norman Malcolm, and Alvin Plantinga think that it's sound.
I like how there are 3 philosophers in favor and only 1 against. It's very subtle.
Here it is. God can be defined as a maximally great being. If something were greater than God, then that being would be God. And in order to be maximally great, a maximally great being would have to be all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect in every possible world.
A world without God is a possible world, so the argument is stopped right here.
Possible worlds are simply ways the world could have been. To say that something exists in a possible world is just to say that if the world were that way, then the thing would have existed. For example, even though unicorns don't exist in the actual world, it seems at least possible that they could have. So we can say that unicorns exist in some possible world.
You could say that God is required to begin any possible world, but that would mean that God is outside of the world, which also defeats this argument.
On the other hand, a married bachelor does not exist in any possible world because the idea of a married bachelor is logically incoherent. It could not possibly exist.
A being who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good is also logically incoherent. On the one hand, the problem of evil means there's no all-powerful and all-good being. But an all-knowing being would also know everything that's evil, which would be evil on its own, since thought crime is a thing in Christianity. I mean, even without being all-knowing and all-good, omnipotence contradicts itself. I mean, can God create a rock that's so heavy you can't lift it?
So if it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then we can say that he exists in some possible world.
It's not, so more holes in this argument.
But wait, a maximally great being would not really be maximally great if it existed in only some possible worlds. To be maximally great, it has to be all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect in every possible world.
How do you know that something must exist to be maximally great? A fictional character who has ultimate power is still maximally great, even if they don't exist in the actual world. And keep in mind, these possible worlds are not real. Things can't actually exist in a possible world. I can say that unicorns exist in some possible world, but that doesn't mean that they actually exist in an actual different world.
So think about it. If a maximally great being exists in any possible world, then it exists in every possible world. And if it exists in every possible world, then it exists in the actual world. That is, a maximally great being actually exists.
There is a possible world where a man exists who can teleport a clone of himself into other possible worlds, and he's done this for every possible world. Therefore, this man must exist in the actual world, because in order for him to exist, he must exist in all possible worlds. That argument is just as sound as the ontological argument.
Thus, the atheist has to maintain not simply that God does not exist, but that it is impossible that God exists.
Nope.
Here's a summary of the ontological argument. Steps 2 through 6 are straightforward and largely uncontroversial. But what about point number 1? Clearly, if it can be shown that the idea of a God is logically incoherent, then the argument fails. But is the idea of a maximally great being absurd?
Yep.
Like a married bachelor, or a square circle, or the smell of blue? This doesn't seem to be the case. The notion of an all-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect being that exists in every possible world seems to be a perfectly coherent idea.
Nope.
But couldn't we parody this argument and make it work for anything?
Yep.
Why not say, It's logically possible that a maximally great pizza exists. Therefore, a maximally great pizza does exist. However, the idea of a maximally great pizza is not like the idea of a maximally great being. In the first place, there aren't intrinsic maximal values that make pizzas great.
True, but it doesn't need to be a maximally great pizza. It just needs to be a pizza that, by definition, exists in all possible worlds.
There could always be one more pepperoni to increase its greatness.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Hold it right there. We do not need any more pepperonis. We need some pineapple.
It's not even obvious what properties make a pizza great. Thin crust or thick crust, extra cheese, anchovies? It's relative to the taste of the consumer. In the second place, a maximally great pizza would have to exist in every logical possible world. But that would mean that it couldn't be eaten. So it wouldn't really be a pizza, because a pizza is something you can eat.
Fine. It's a plastic toy that looks like a pizza that exists in every possible world. With this logic, you can prove that anything exists. Simply say, in some possible universe, there is $1 million in my pocket, which, by definition of this object, exists in every possible universe. Poof, there are $1 million in your pocket.
The idea of a maximally great pizza turns out not to be a coherent idea. The idea of God, on the other hand, is an intuitively coherent idea.
Sure, the idea of a God is intuitively coherent, but when you take a second look, you can quickly see that it isn't.
Therefore, his existence is a possibility.
Wrong.
And the ontological argument
Nope.
shows that if God possibly exists, then God actually exists.
Absolutely not. That's all for now. Follow me on Minds, and stay tuned for the next video, whenever that's going to go up.